Good morning. Your Excellencies, distinguished panelists and participants, dear online viewers, welcome to the second EU Accession Exchange Forum. A year ago, we designed this forum as the main expert platform for exchange of lessons learned and ideas between all interested EU candidate and potential candidate countries. And this year, we are happy to welcome in person participants from Moldova, Georgia, Western Balkans, as well as a broad number of EU member states. Thank you, everyone, for being here and being here in person. Why it's so important for us, for New Europe Center I represent? Because we are convinced that more coordination and more cooperation between all candidate states will lead to a more effective and more meaningful EU enlargement policy. Dear participants, we've composed this year's forum discussions according to the challenges we in Kiev, in Ukraine, see as the most obvious challenges for future enlargement process. To be more precise, we identified three major challenges so far, and we will have accordingly 3 discussion panels reflecting those challenges later. The first challenge is EU accession process under unprecedented military aggression in Europe since World War II. As Ukrainian living in Ukraine, I have to admit, sometimes it's really difficult to focus on anything beyond basic security issues, and sometimes it's very difficult to plan anything properly, including today's event. But we have to, actually, because we don't want to just survive, we as Ukraine, we don't want to just survive as a post-Soviet state. We are determined to emerge after the war as a modern European state. And for this, we need a real, meaningful EU accession process. The second challenge is internal EU reform, which obviously will have an impact on all future enlargement moves. We know where major member states stand on this. But in many candidate states, and we have to admit that, the discussion on the vision of the EU's future has not really started. Let's start it today. And the last huge challenge we see, reforms inside candidate countries. Granting Ukraine EU candidate status became maybe the best what happened to Ukraine in its relations not just with the EU, but with external world in general. The best what happened to Ukraine in decades. But this status also proved to become the effective tool for pushing important reforms in the right direction. Later today, we will present and discuss our already 5th edition of Candidate Check, independent monitoring of Ukraine's implementation of 7 EU recommendations. Assessment which has been initiated by New Europe Center and conducted in partnership with major Ukrainian sectoral think tanks and NGOs, Anti-Corruption Action Center, De Jure Foundation, European Pravda, ANS Network, Transparency International, Ukraine Center for Policy and Legal Reforms, Ukrainian Center for Independent Political Research, and others. In our coalition, we remain convinced that opening accession talks with the EU, based on upcoming Commission report, would become even more powerful tool for reforming the country. Bigger goal requires deeper reforms. It's simple. Dear participants, Ukraine and the EU decisively passed the point of no return with regard to Ukraine's future membership. Now we have to pass the point of no excuse. No excuse for artificial obstacles, for real, meaningful, and merit-based from on both sides accession process. By saying that, I would like to thank those without whom this forum would not happen. The European Union, International Renaissance Foundations, who supported the initiative from its very beginning, and Deputy Prime Minister's Office for European and Atlantic Integration of Ukraine for being an official partner of the event for the second time. Let me also thank our partners from Moldova, Georgia, and Germany, IPRE, OSF Georgia, and LibMod, as well as European Pravda for great media partnership. My special thanks goes to USAID Engage program for supporting candidate check, independent monitoring, and many other New Europe Center activities on Ukraine's Euro integration track. Now I'm honored and pleased to pass the floor to our great partner and one of the best Ukraine strategists on the EU, Oleksandr SUSHKO, who is currently in Berlin, but he prepared a pre-recorded welcoming message for the participants of the forum.
Good morning, dear colleagues, and let me welcome you everyone who arrived this morning to attend our Accession Exchange Forum, which I think is one of the most remarkable civil society initiatives to provide high-level expertise and opinion exchange on the future of Europe. Our foundation is fully supportive for this forum for many years, and we continue to be on board. We believe that forum provides that level of continuity, expertise, and connections between the relevant people that we look forward with the optimism. Even now, with these extremely difficult times, which really proved to be probably the most dramatic in Europe for decades, now we are in the epicenter of the events, which I think will determine the future of Europe for decades, if not centuries. Here in the Eastern Europe, we are about to build a missing page of European history. We are here to discuss the missing element of European architecture, and then to follow with a plan, if not plan, that vision of how to reach what we wish to reach as an output. I think that we will build our discussion in order, first of all, to discuss the path of reforms in the candidate countries, and then we will look closely to the lessons and learn lessons from the past experiences of other countries which are here, which are candidates. And this experience proves that along with the positive achievements, we had something wrong. I think that we have to discuss the experience of the others in order to avoid typical mistakes and in order to build a proper path to the future. I think that it is in our hands, first of all, to motivate domestic stakeholders in Ukraine and other Eastern European candidate and aspirant countries of the EU to build strong and effective coalition in order to succeed with the plan of reforms. And on the other hand, we have to build strong and sustainable coalition in the existing European Union, in the member states, in order to succeed with their support, to make it sustainable, to make it really consistent, in order to build this process as a bridging between the willingness of the current member states to enlarge the Union and the willingness of the Eastern European candidate countries to succeed with accession. And I hope this Accession Exchange Forum will contribute a lot, and wish you good and productive work today.
Thank you, Oleksandr, for quite inspiring words. And now let me invite Leo Litra, who is Senior Fellow at New Europe Center and the coordinator of this forum, which is more important today even, for update of last-minute changes in the programs and maybe something more even. Yeah, Leo, please.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to the second Accession Exchange Forum. My name is Leo. I'm with the New Europe Center, and I'm happy to be part of, for the second time of this event. As Alyona already mentioned, we have slight changes in the agenda. The first change is that Deputy Prime Minister Olga Stefanishyna will be after lunch at 2 o'clock. So there's a visit of some high official currently taking place, and Olga, as well as Igor Zhovko, who is Deputy Head of the Office of President and Diplomatic Advisor of President Zelensky, have to be at the meeting now with the President. That's why Deputy Prime Minister Olga Stefanishyna will be at 2 o'clock, and Igor Zhovko will be at the concluding remarks at 5:30. So this is the updated part. Since we have, as you may see in the agenda, we designed to have 2 coffee breaks not far from each other to make sure that all the participants have enough time to do networking. This is, I think, still one of the best parts of this kind of events, because aside from speech and ideas made from this place, I think people need enough time to interact. But before going to the next coffee break, which would be the networking part, I think we have a great opportunity to have a sort of ad hoc reflection on what kind of topics we could discuss today, and what are the most pressing issues we could discuss today. And we thought that this would be a sort of warming up, an inception part of our forum, if you want. And I would like, in this regard, to ask a couple of people to say what they think would be good to talk about today. And then we'll go for coffee break, and then we start as planned with the session 2 at 11:30. So before doing this, I think Alyona already made this introduction, which was quite to the point, that we have identified during, the reflection, during the planning of this forum, that we need to tackle 3 issues. The first is how the security context affects the overall accession process, the enlargement, and I think Thomas Kleine-Brockhoff will moderate this panel, this session, and will reflect on this more. The second issue, which is the EU reform, is becoming an increasingly important question for Ukraine. I must say I'm impressed by the fact that I keep hearing at different institutions in Ukraine reflection about what kind of QMV, what kind of decision-making should be in Europe, in the EU, because Ukraine sees itself as a future member, and they already care about these kind of issues. I think this is important. And third, and I think maybe the most important, is the reform in all of our countries, Western Balkans, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine. We have to learn a lot from the countries who are in the process for some time already. So these are the 3 questions, but there is much more. So if you allow me, I would like to hand over first for some remarks to Carmen Claudine, who is Senior Research Fellow at the CDOP in Barcelona. So Carmen, I will hand over, and then we pass it to the next speaker. I think it's, yeah, it's
okay. Thank you, Leo. Well, my ideas go quite in line of the last words of Sasha SUSHKO. We all know that the big challenge is that the candidate countries have to get ready for the enlargement, and they have to make very important and difficult homeworks at home in order to qualify. But for me, and talking from the perspective of a country who knows very well what are the benefits of integrating the EU, and from a country for which, like Spain, Ukraine, and in general, Eastern Europe is something like, something like kind of far away, not really related to our national interests and all that. So for me, the most important challenge after the first one I just said is for us, members of the EU, also to qualify for this enlargement. That means to make our own homework. And for the people who are gathering here, my colleagues from different think tanks, I think that they would agree with me that probably one of our most important tasks in our countries is not only to offer analysis and explain the debates and all that, which is the work as usual, but now in helping to consolidate an informed national public opinion in our countries, in order not only to support the decisions of our government, like for instance in Spain, where the government is for the time being very supportive of the idea of the enlargement, but in order to consolidate public opinion which will be also pushing in that direction, which is something that we are lacking in the EU. We can have sympathetical public opinion, but when it comes to the national elections, the domestic elections, it is not an issue which makes a difference. And that is something in which, an area in which we could have something to do and a role to play, to help to push in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen, for your inputs. And I would like to pass next to, not far, is Pierre Roche from France, who is teaching in UK, but he's from France. So I think we have a unique opportunity maybe to hear some ideas from both sides. Pierre, please.
Thank you very much, and I'm very glad to be here and very honored. A few questions I would be very interested in discussing with you all is, first, what are the first practical steps that we can envision towards accession? There are many talks about the concept of gradual or progressive accession, and I think it makes sense in this context to think about gradual accession, because it can speed the process, but at the same time without necessarily having a big leap or a brutal leap for candidate country. But one of the questions is what are the best first steps, the first sectors that we should think about in order to launch the process? And this is also a question for the candidate countries. What are the first sectors, the first steps that you would think as strategic for launching the process? More generally, I would be also interested in the question about the contribution of future member states. What kind of contribution they can provide to the European integration project. Of course, if I'm thinking about Ukraine in terms of European security, in terms of strengthening a European pillar within NATO, because I think that EU accession and NATO accession are also strongly connected. In terms of having a more geopolitical union, that's also perhaps a topic that could be interesting. And more generally, also in terms of European identity, what kind of narrative that this accession process could produce. And also a question for future member states or potential future member states is, what kind of member states do you want to be? That's also something that can be interested in relation to the debate with the public opinion in existing member states. What kind of union do you want to build with us? What kind of project do you want to build? Because, as you know, the European Union is not a static system, it's an ongoing project, and you will be contributing to its definition and progress. Leo talked about qualified majority voting, the question of the institutions, and I, among many people in other member states, I also believe that the enlargement will transform the EU. It will not just transform member states. So we have to think about strengthening the institutions, strengthening the EU. And finally, I would like to echo something that Carmen already mentioned, the importance of public opinion. I come from a member state, France, that has always been very skeptical towards enlargement, has always feared enlargement as a risk of diluting the union, weakening, killing the union. But this time is different in the sense that not only the government but also the public opinion is really and sincerely in favor of, in particular for Ukraine, EU and NATO accession. But the closer we'll get to the actual decision, the more difficult this debate will be. And we have to think about a common narrative, not just a technical discussion among experts, but a narrative that we can diffuse among the general population about what it means for us to build this union together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pierre. I think this is precisely echoing the inception debate we have in Ukraine, although we are far away still from this, approaching this question in a way you approach them. However, the fact that this debate is taking place already in Ukraine is a good sign, I guess. Although we might not be on the same page on many issues, I think, and it depends very much how the war will affect. So we get back again. I don't want to spoil the first session, which will be after the coffee break. So I'll stop here and go to the next person I would like to ask to intervene, Łukasz Adamski, who is Deputy Director to Center Mierzejewska in Poland.
Thank you for the invitation. Follow up on the remarks which we have just heard, namely, the basic question I think Ukraine has to answer, Ukrainian elite, is, besides, of course, how to fulfill requirements, legal and economic requirements to be in the EU, is what kind of the EU Ukraine wants. And does Ukraine follow closely debates, internal debates in the EU about the future of European integration? And this debate are really have those debates have now strong political impact. Namely, there are German proposals which de facto say that future enlargements of the EU has to be combined, combined with the changing of voting system in the EU, with the internal reforms in the EU, pushing this, which is now a confederation from the legal point of view, confederation of national states, into a de facto federal Europe. At least it is so perceived in my country, in Poland, by a significant part of political elites. And then, of course, there are voices which are against such approach, which means that for Ukraine, that future process of integration means also for Ukraine a necessity to incorporate into its strategy also public opinion moods in various EU countries, and Ukraine should actually take into account possible obstacles in various EU countries resulting from internal debate in those countries. In Poland now, it is no secret that because of the grain issue, which is heavily debated, as in Ukraine, I'm here for several days, and really, in the previous week I was in Poland. It is probably still a main topic of political debate. How these problems emerge, and whether the reason for those problems were emotions of politicians, conflicts of economic interests, or, as significant part of Polish commentators claim, there were also some external actors involved into this conflict. And by no way it was of course Russia, but it was rather Germany who, in this interpretation, persuade a Ukrainian elite to loosen sometimes its ties with Poland, with Poland ruled by conservative government, which is against EU reform. So I will stop here, but my main intention is to suggest that it has to be debated also in Ukraine, since future ratification of EU enlargement needs, of course, social ratification, not only legal ratification, but also political support and public opinion support for those ratification. Poland has been an advocate of enlargement of the EU for, let's say, I think 25 years. So it started to push this idea before even it became a member of the EU itself. But now, in my country, there are more and more intense debate whether the future membership of Ukraine will perhaps not strengthen the power of Germany and will not diminish the power of national states and European nations who are bearer of sovereignty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas, very much for this. Please pass the mic next to the next speaker, Dmytro Shulga, who I will ask to make a few remarks as well. But just before he prepares to speak, I think these questions you raised, and also Carmen and Pierre before, are very important, since we are lacking certain debates here in Ukraine. The one about the EU reform and what could be our contribution, what could be our joint union, which was rightly mentioned. But also I feel something that we do not, so I'm starting to criticize our own event now, which is okay for a think tanker. We do not have enough discussion about the Western Balkans. I feel this is a big gap we have to fill in the next years. And I'm happy we have few participants from the Western Balkans this year. And next year, we should bring a much bigger team of these people, because we are underestimating their experience. Either good or bad, it's a different question, but we have to cope with this. So, Dmytro, please.
Yes, actually, just to continue. I remember, like many years ago, in a peaceful Ukraine, we were joking, like, should we have some security crisis in Ukraine in order, comparing to Western Balkans, who had the accession perspective at the time of the Thessaloniki process. So should we have some security crisis in Ukraine in order for you to take seriously our bid? And eventually, I just recently heard from the Western Balkans, should we have a full-scale invasion in order for you to seriously put Balkans on track compared to Ukraine? So it's very interesting to have these perspectives as well. But I would come back maybe to the question of the panel which I will be moderating after the lunch. It's focused on really the EU domestic reform and exactly those questions which we just recently had already mentioned by distinguished colleagues. I mean, Ukraine reinvigorated enlargement, and enlargement reinvigorated debate about the internal reform of the EU. And actually, I remember several years ago, I think it was still Association Exchange Forum. It was not yet Accession Exchange Forum, but in one of the Association Exchange Forums, Michael Emerson from SEPS was speaking and presenting his ideas about staged accession, reform of the enlargement process, and possibility, for instance, for new members to come to join the EU without veto right, or declare that they refuse from veto right and some other things, which are kind of typical for normal members now, but kind of in the spirit of supporting the reform of the EU, which is needed. And I remember I had some conversations in Ukraine, and of course it's not that many people who are following that much the internal reform, but there were many questions like, should we support, like, should we think about ourselves already as a second-tier member? It's a big question. But basically, there's a huge discussion what's going on now as I try to follow the debate in the European Union, reinvigorated again with this Franco-German proposal. Yeah. A very interesting paper with many interesting ideas. But as far as I understand, there is no consensus. And those Franco-German proposals are not necessarily will be, as we already hear, not will be necessarily taken, at least by some of the countries. Not will be supported. This will be probably a big issue for debate in the upcoming European elections next year. And it's a question where, I mean, this question, what will be Ukraine vision, I think it's also interesting for debate. But I think right now, Ukraine understands that we are not decision maker yet in this debate. And the most important issue for us is that this issue will not block our accession process. But anyway, I think whatever happens, when Ukraine will join the EU, if it will be reformed or not reformed, Ukraine will be a constructive member. We see examples of being not constructive in some cases of some of the countries, which impact on our interests as well. By the way, very key security interests. So that's why I think Ukraine's approach will be constructive. But what sort of constructive approach? This is a big issue. And what sort of reform will be there in the EU? It's also a big issue. So I hope we will discuss these questions in more detail and exchange perspectives, and hopefully I don't think we will reach the consensus, but actually we will reach the debate and enrich Ukrainians to understand the domestic debate in the EU, but also maybe partially at least answer the questions of colleagues from the EU on what is the Ukrainian perspective on those questions, and also of the colleagues from the Western Balkans who will be also in the panel. Thank you. Thank you,
Dmytro, actually, for adding this Ukrainian flavor to the debate, to the ideas we previously heard. And this is a big, actually, debate, I have to say. We are on live streaming, but I won't say names then. But there is a big debate of what kind of member could be Ukraine in the future. Of course, everyone thinks and hopes that it will be a constructive, but that depends a lot on the war, actually. Because if the war will continue, I think the birth of Ukrainian Gaullism is not far away from the horizon. And that could complicate a little bit the overall perspective. That's what I hear from my EU European friends in some of the countries. Before going to coffee break, this was, I mean, the interventions with the pre-agreed people for this ad hoc session. If there is anyone who would like to say something, like who insists on saying something before we go into coffee break and thinks something was missed from this opportunity, I'll give you the chance. Jovana Morovic, former Deputy Prime Minister for European Integration of Montenegro.
Thanks, Leo. As you said, it would be good to hear somebody from the Western Balkans, because we are jointly in this process. And from the first intervention, my impression is that we are still dividing ourselves. The first thing is that the reform of the European Union has to go hand in hand with the reform of the EU enlargement process, because this is one of the most successful processes and policies in the European Union. And then also strengthening of democracy should go hand in hand in the European Union, in the Western Balkans, in all other countries in EU member states, because there is also lack of democracy in the EU member states. And the second thing, that between Ukraine Moldova and the Western Balkans, there is no competition. There are now two enlargement processes. We are together in this, and we have to help each other in this process. So for me, these are the most important topics for this exchange forum. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jovana. So I think on this note, we can enjoy the coffee break and have a small talk, networking, and we get back at 11:30 with the session which would be moderated by Thomas Kleine-Brockhoff, which is, I think, the stellar panel, very interesting on security. Yeah, thank you.
So, welcome to this first panel. My name is Thomas Kleine-Brockhoff with the German Marshall Fund in Berlin. What we want to discuss today is how the security environment influences, or maybe alters, speeds up, delays, whatever you think, the accession process to the EU. It is clear that we have known for quite a while since this war started that there will be no recovery without security, and there will be no security without recovery. So there is a linkage between the two. Today we want to explore the linkage between accession and the security element. Here with me to discuss Katarina Maternova, newly minted head of the delegation of the Europe.
You can call it ambassador. It's an EU ambassador.
It's an EU ambassador. I can call it ambassador.
Yeah. For some reason, there has been this mistaken way of calling it. So we're trying to.
I will put you on speakerphone so you can. It can be for live streaming purposes. So, ambassador of the delegation of the European
Union. Ambassador
well,
of the European
correction.
Union.
I'll get this right over the course of this conversation. Stanislav Sekru, National Security Advisor to the President of the Republic of Moldova. Thanks for being here. And Oleksandr Ilkov, the head of the Office of European and Euro-Atlantic Integration here, the government of Ukraine, stepping in for your Zhovkva, who will be with us later, who has other government business to do, as we've heard before. Claudia Major, the German Institute of International Security Affairs, where she heads the International Security Division, and Pierre Harouche, who we've heard of before. There he is in this previous session. So, what I would like to start with is to do a little quiz here with our audience. And the question that I'd like to just raise hands for me to see where you are on this. Now, the war has clearly been an accelerator of the EU process so far, but will it be in the future, or will it delay or inhibit even the membership? So if you are in the camp of those that say it will speed things up, please raise your hands now. Panel, keep it down. We want to do this panel. We'll do the panel thereafter. See how the panel does it. So once again, please hands up if you think in future, not in past, but in future, it will speed things up. Hands up. Okay. Security, environment, war will inhibit or delay the process. Hands up, please. Okay, that's clearly fewer. But we're not of all the same opinion. Okay, important to note. Now let me ask that same question on the panel. Will it speed up the process, or will it inhibit? If you're speed up, hands up now. Okay, 3 speed up. And in the future, delay or inhibit? Hands up. Okay, I don't see hands, but I don't have 5 opinions here. Madam Ambassador, is that a coincidence? Okay, so I think we have a pretty good sense that this is a real issue that we'll be discussing here. And I want to ask the National Security Advisor from Moldova first. So please give us a perspective in just a couple of minutes from Moldova, how that security environment, from your perspective, intimately linked with this process and your own ambition. How is that seen from your country?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invite. It's nice to be in Kyiv. Second, I would like to congratulate Ambassador Maternova for taking over the position. If I think about someone, I cannot imagine a better person to do this job. On the war, I would like to state the position of Moldova. We strongly condemn the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and we strongly sustain territorial integrity of Ukraine. It's fully recognized in its internationally recognized borders. Now, the link between war and accession, the view from Moldova, I think first, we changed our perception about enlargement, about the accession process. Initially and mostly, we were thinking about it in terms of transformation, economic development of the country. Since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation, obviously the security dimension of the process became much stronger and more important for us. And we see the accession to EU not only as a chance to transform country, but also to secure our energy sector, to improve our cyber security, to improve our economic security, and security in other fields. Second element, the war and accession, is that for us, European integration became a more urgent issue. We don't have a lot of time. We see that we have in front of us two scenarios. Either we are aggressively swallowed by authoritarian power, or we secure our democracy and freedom inside the European Union. And we don't have decades to do accession. We have only a bit of time to make progress and to join European Union. Our president sets the goal that by 2030 we must be prepared to join European Union. And all the actions we did since the full-scale invasion, application, rapidly replying to questionnaire, mobilizing our bureaucracy to fulfill the steps submitted by EU Commission, mobilization for potentially positive decision to have a follow-up immediately. Everything demonstrates on our side the urgency of European integration for Moldova. Third element of impact of aggression on Ukraine and how we see the accession process is the fact that we have to do two things simultaneously. We have to defend ourselves against constant waves of hybrid attacks on Moldova, which stretches the capacity of public administration to the limit. But at the same time, we need these capacities to do reforms. Yeah? And I don't remember any other candidates who would like to join EU, who would have to defend against severe national security threats, and at the same time to pursue European integration. I think this requires adjustments in the accession process. This requires probably more assistance on EU side to help us to secure ourselves internally. We receive a lot of assistance, but again, the power or stakeholders in the system who are abroad or inside Moldova, they oppose to reforms not necessarily only for material reasons, not because they want to protect their financial illegal operations, but because there are geopolitical interests behind these attempts to derail our European integration. And the geopolitical reasons are more powerful than the material reasons in this case. So we face a much bigger resistance than probably candidates in the previous waves of enlargement. Probably the last element, we look at the accession process not only the way that we receive assistance to get into the EU, we see the process through which we demonstrate through practical examples that we, as a future member state, EU member state, will be showing solidarity with other EU member states or states who are on their path towards EU. And for us, it's really important to demonstrate, and we do it every day. We for instance, extending our capacity, and we are joining international coalition to do demining, training for Ukrainian deminers. We extending solidarity lines. We are aligning with more EU sanction regimes, and we are becoming much closer partner in terms of common and foreign security policy. We as well increasing our participation in peacekeeping operations. The signal we are sending is that we are acting as a de facto EU member state, and we will be a EU member state who is responsible and taking its responsibility seriously and contributes to solutions and not only consumes the security which is provided by EU and EU member states. I think I will stop here, but I will be happy to add a few details if they need be.
Probably in the second round we'll come back to the question of how you look at that war and the war's influence. I want to turn to Claudia Major. My question to you is probably, are we even talking about the right thing here? Are we asking the right question when we're saying how is the war influencing EU accession? Isn't NATO coming before that? What's the linkage here in the question of that accession influence that we're discussing today?
Thank you, Thomas, and thanks for inviting me to Kiev. It's great to be here. I actually agree. I think that we should think the two processes, NATO accession and EU accession, we need to think them more together because they're, for me, deeply integrated and interlinked. 3 brief points. The first is, if we look at the war, because that's the main question you asked initially, Thomas, the war has accelerated both processes in a way, for me, unthinkable before. If you look back to the Vilnius summit, we might not be happy with the result of the NATO summit, but if we remember back in spring 2023, in March or April, nobody talked about NATO accession of Ukraine in a serious way. And from that perspective, the result of the Vilnius summit, even if most of us would have wished for more clarity, is actually interesting. So we have a clear accession of the acceleration of the accession process. What I tend to think is that we have a kind of big boost in the process, and that comes back to the initial question, which goes now down to a more normal speed. And the big challenge is actually to keep that speed. So big acceleration, but now back to normal speed of an accession process. The second point is indeed, as you said, I tend to think that not only NATO and EU accession are linked, I would even say that NATO accession is a precondition for successful EU accession. Not only because security and economic order are linked, you need a stable framework for economic and infrastructure reconstruction. So they are deeply interlinked. Without a secure framework, we will be struggle, or there will be big struggle to get particularly private finances to come in. So that's the first. The secure framework is needed for economic reconstruction on the bigger scale. The second is that the EU clearly has a security dimension with Article 42.7. That is, at least on paper, a security guarantee like NATO, at least on paper. In the moment, the EU countries are not able to honor Article 42.7. So in order to be actually able to have this security guarantee, we need the NATO framework. So that's why, for me, it's clear that NATO accession actually needs to precede an EU accession. And if you look back to the past, and you look to the last enlargement rounds in the 90s, NATO accession always preceded EU accession, for example, for the Baltic countries and Poland. Last point, and that's a really important one, if you talk about accession, NATO has to be ready for accession, as the EU has to be ready. And there are mainly 2 points we need to focus on. And the first is cohesion and unity. The Vilnius result was a Vilnius result as we know it because NATO was not united. There were some countries who didn't agree on a clear invitation. So the unity of all NATO allies and the cohesion is crucial. And that also means that no ally should try to use Ukraine to solve its bilateral issues. I'm thinking about this morning. So I find it terribly important that NATO countries agree with each other and find the cohesion. If we remember the Swedish accession process to NATO, which is still not over, that's a big risk. NATO cannot afford a second process like that. So unity is extremely important. And the military capacity to act to NATO. If Ukraine is to be integrated into NATO, that means a total adaptation of the defense planning, posture, and command structures. And as we all know, so far, it to a large extent highly depends upon American contributions. So this is not a reason to say no, it's just a reason to explain why NATO accession needs as much preparation as the EU accession. And that there is a lot of homework, particularly for the European states. But again, I think the key message for me here is to say, if NATO allies don't work on that cohesion and unity, we have a major issue.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you raised your hand first in the "this will speed up" department in future. Now, we've already heard one caveat from Claudia Major, which is, well, there is something called NATO accession, even in her terms, a precondition. So what makes you think that it will be speeding up? As Claudia said, it's come back to normal. Now, normal in Ukrainian years, it means forever. Tell me.
Yeah, thank you very much. I very much agree with Claudia in the sense that, first, I think that the prospect would not even be in the agenda without the war. If it was just for the economic and legal convergence, it would remain a long-term prospect. This enlargement, and I agree with Claudia that both EU and NATO are deeply connected, so this enlargement for the EU is, in essence, a geopolitical enlargement, and it is justified as such. It's not for deepening the single market. The objective is to create a rampart against Russian influence and to get some countries in so that they are not prey, they're no longer prey for Russian attack. And that's the main argument, which was not so high in the agenda just a few years before. So, and the second point I also wanted to underline is the connection between the two. And that's why I think that some of the agenda for EU accession should be also to contribute to the so-called European pillar within NATO, because I think there is an interdependence between the two projects. And what is the European pillar within NATO? Basically, it's the argument, it's making concrete the idea that there is a strong European contribution within NATO and that it's not just a task for US forces. And that can contribute to alleviate some fears and reluctance in Washington vis-à-vis NATO membership, because many decision makers in Washington have that fear that it could hinder US margin for maneuver at the global level if the US commitment in Europe was deepened, and they want to increase their margin for maneuver. And for the EU, I think that this war has illustrated that there is now a clear division of labor, even clearer than in the past between the EU and NATO, because the EU has some budgetary and industrial instruments that NATO doesn't have, which allow it to contribute precisely to the construction of this European pillar within NATO. And I just want to add that this is something that we can already have in mind when thinking about this concept of progressive accession. I'm thinking about the origins of European integration between France and Germany. The argument at the beginning in the 1950s was that not everything could be decided overnight, not everything could be integrated immediately, but integration had to start with a decisive and symbolic sector. And I think that security and defense, in the case of Ukraine accession in particular, could be an important first step. And an idea that I'm willing to explore and discuss is that it could be a good first step in the accession process to have an agreement between the European Union and Ukraine for the integration of Ukraine within the defense part of this single market and into the EU industrial defense instruments, so that there is already a co-construction of this European pillar within NATO. And this is something we mentioned in the previous discussion. We shouldn't wait that Ukraine is a EU and NATO member to have this joint reflection about what do we want to do together. This starts now. And I think that Ukraine has already shown, not just in the way it conducts this war, but also in terms of its innovative skills, also in the industrial sector, that it can contribute a lot to the European reflection. It would not just be a recipient from support. So I think this is a task that we should already conduct together.
So would I be brutalizing your point if I said the diktat of the geopolitical is the main factor that creates the speed and will continue to create the speed?
I wouldn't call it a diktat, but I think, yes, and actually there is a convergence, because the Union is also becoming geopolitical for many other reasons connected to the evolution of the global landscape and so on. Let's think about how many economic instruments are becoming more geo-economic, how the European Commission is calling itself a geopolitical commission. So there is, I would say, a convergence between the evolution of the identity of the Union and the nature of this enlargement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ambassador Martinova. I got that right.
You got it.
So you've already heard a couple of perspectives on this, actually divergent perspectives. What's yours?
Well, first, thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm sorry I gave you a hard time about the title, but
I'm already used to that.
Exactly. We have a long history of very useful debates, and it's really been an honor yesterday to be able to submit my letters of credentials to the President, to President Zelensky, and it's really an honor to be here. Some of you may know I have been dealing with Ukraine for many, many years, since 2015, but being here and being able to contribute to what hopefully will be geopolitical enlargement is really an immense and humbling pleasure and honor. What is my perspective? I did not raise my hand just because, and I'm glad I didn't, because there is one element that ties all of these things together. And I very much subscribe to the notion that if it wasn't for the unfortunate and tragic escalation of the war, the invasion of 24th of February of last year, we wouldn't be discussing this. That is very clear, because for all the obvious reasons and the lack of consensus on EU enlargement previously. I mean, Claudia spoke about the importance of unity and consensus and cohesion, and there wasn't one before that, and so it was only the war that created the proximate cause for that consensus. But one element which was extremely important in the positive assessment of last June by the leaders, an invitation to Moldova and Ukraine as candidate members, and Georgia getting the European perspective, was based on the internal transformations in the countries. If we didn't go, and this is, I really want to repeat this and will repeat this publicly everywhere, thanks to the fact that we had the very deep association agreements, trade agreements that went through a panoply of domestic reforms with huge emphasis on governance, rule of law, anti-corruption, building of institutions, building of regulatory regimes, already for a number of years, there would not have been even the basis to discuss that. So what I want to bring into this debate is the diktat, the vector will be geopolitics, and I very much like your idea, Pierre, of starting actually from the security angle, because I very much agree with both of you that the link between NATO and the security arrangements and guarantees and the enlargement are connected. So the vector is geopolitics, but to be able to get there is the continuation and even speeding up of the reforms internally in Ukraine. Let's not forget the Vilnius summit in the declaration, got language on reforms. We are busily discussing the leaked paper by the US that was published in Europejska Pravda. We have my colleagues from the Commission coming next week to discuss a reform plan on Ukraine to be part of the basis for the financing of the next 4 years. In other words, this is an element which the geopolitics will drive it, but this is an element without which you're not going to move on the geopolitics either. And for a very simple reason. Certainly, I'm not an expert on NATO, but certainly within the European Union, it's such a complex entity or series of entities that a country of the size of Ukraine, and then you have Moldova, you have Georgia, you have the Western Balkans, even in the enlargement process of Turkey, it's such a complex animal, the EU, that you really need to have reformed countries to come in. Otherwise, the system would be under threat as such. So I just wanted to bring this element in, and I am very big fan of actually making steps on the way rather than this, you just keep reforming and then the big payoff is the day of enlargement. That worked with the 2004 and 7 and 13. But now, especially after the experience over the past 10 years with the Balkans, that's not going to cut it anymore. So I think it is really incumbent upon us to come up with steps in between. And I didn't think of what Pierre suggested before. Perhaps that's a way of bridging the two institutions and building on that. But I wanted to bring the reform and the importance of the reforms domestically to the discussion.
Thank you. Now we have one Ukrainian on this panel, Oleksandr Ilkov. Now we've previously agreed, I should disclose that, and he has graciously agreed to go last for a purpose. And the purpose is he can now clean up from a Ukrainian perspective all the things these other Europeans have put forward, and you can bend them or even correct them, disagree with them if you like, from your perspective. You're also allowed to agree, of course.
Good morning, dear colleagues. It's a pleasure and honor for me to be here today. Today's discussion takes place on the eve of very important events. You know that very soon the European Commission will publish its enlargement package report, and in December the European Council has to decide on the start of negotiations with the candidate countries. Many years ago we looked at the European future of Ukraine as it's something that is far on the horizon, and today we understand that European Ukraine is no longer a dream, and moreover the ambitious goal of EU enlargement is also already a reality. I think that historical times lead to historical decisions. The European Union was formed as a response to the World War II. The largest wave of the European Union enlargement was a response to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of Berlin Wall. And right now, again, the background of the full-scale aggression against Ukraine, the issue of enlargement of the European Union is the only possible response for preserving the values on which the European Union was established. However, I think that this process, which now takes place, has its own peculiarities. First, it's extremely high speed and intensity. You know that just on the 5th day after the beginning of full-scale aggression against Ukraine, Ukraine applied to join the European Union. And just a few days after that, this decision was followed by Moldova and Georgia. In June 2022, we were already granted by the status of candidate, and now we are on the verge of making a decision on the start of accession talks. Second, the speed does not mean a reduction of quality. Now will be a quote, accession is merit-based and the Commission will always defend this principle. The President of European Commission, Ms. Ursula von der Leyen, clearly noted this in her 2023 State of Union address. And Ukraine also fully understands this. For example, and implementation of the 7 recommendations of European Commission are powerful steps towards the rule of law, democracy, and human rights. The same approach, notably financial aid in exchange for reforms, is reflected in microfinancial assistance aid of the European Union to Ukraine. And you know that this approach will be even strengthened within the framework of the new instrument, Ukraine Facility, which will be implemented by the European Union. We also already started our active work on the third criteria, alignment with EU Acquis. We know that Ukraine was the first country which started the process of self-screening. We already analyzed more than 28,000 acts of Acquis, identified that more than 3,000 should be implemented into Ukrainian legislation. The next step will be a preparation of the national program for adaptation of Acquis, forming a negotiation position, strengthening the capacity of our institutions. And the third, perhaps the most important feature of the current European integration process in our country is the fact that the future is unity regarding the fact that the future of Ukraine is in the European Union. You know that more than 92% of Ukrainians supporting Ukraine's joining the European Union. And no one in Ukraine has the right to override this will of Ukrainian society. And I want to assure you that now as never before, Ukrainian government, Ukrainian parliament, and the president are united in their will to realize this, this will of Ukrainian people as soon as possible. Probably you heard about the recent exchange of the statements by the parliament and the government, that both government and parliament told that they successfully implemented almost all recommendations of the European Commission, and it's a very good example of healthy competence, but I have to, to tell you frankly that there is some more steps that Parliament still needs to make.
Anything that you've heard that you would like to comment on your colleagues from the different institutions and countries?
I think that all of us reflected on the same things. We agreed that despite the full-scale aggression, there will not be any gap in speeding of our process of European integration. And I think that colleagues from Moldova and Her Excellency also agree on this.
Now, okay, so let me try a second question on you. You've all tried to, in your reasoning, harmonize so the geopolitical vector, as you put it, with quality and merit-based. What if this, as many people increasingly believe, is a long war? How does the long war influence this process? Because, of course, the security environment is not improving under these conditions, and that can also affect the ability to act inside the country and within the European Union. And how, if so?
Indeed, the prospect of a long war is a scary one for everybody, most notably the defenders and people in Ukraine and the policymakers. But the tragedy of it actually creates, I'm not saying it's bad to use the word opportunity when we are talking about a tragic situation like the war, but it creates a possibility to actually have consensus and push through processes and reforms that in a peacetime are harder to find consensus on. And the reason why I'm saying that is that the one and many public opinions show that the one thing that has changed during the war are societal expectations of the public, and sort of thinking we are not losing our boys and girls to go back to the old Ukraine, right? To go to the oligarchical Ukraine and to go to business as usual. We are defending our land, but we want a new Ukraine, and that creates an environment in which, in fact, in the last 18 months, there have been major transformational steps taken. I mean, it's quite extraordinary that Ukraine is taking really fundamental reform steps at the same time as it's fighting a war. I mean, it's really a remarkable resilience, both of the society and of the institutions. They grew, they sort of got strengthened as part of the war. Now, I am afraid that if it were to be really long, if we are talking about multiple year, that dynamic may break down. So I really hope that we are not going to get to that. And I think that us as the international community have agency in this.
You've referred to the domestic Ukrainian process and its impressive resilience. Is that also true do you mean to say that is also true for the member states?
Well, I think that there is more recognition now than it was at the beginning, that Ukraine is really fighting our war. For that is not only a Ukrainian war, that it is a European war for that Ukraine has to win. Otherwise, it's not only that Ukraine got aggressed, the international order got aggressed, right? The rule-based order that we have all grew up under. I mean, I grew up under behind the Iron Curtain, but still that order lasted and survived the falling of the Iron, not falling, raising of the Iron Curtain, falling of the wall, and sustained us. And now it has broken apart. So, from that perspective, I think there is much more recognition among the member states of the need to help Ukraine win.
Much more recognition, but there's also Ukraine fatigue. What about that one? Anybody?
Yeah, this is an important question, and I'm not sure. You could have the argument that the longer the war, the more fatigue you will have among allies, whether in Europe or the United States and so on. I'm not completely sure that the correlation works like that. And if I look at the polls, for instance, in my country, in France, it's interesting to notice that actually support for Ukraine membership in EU, NATO, support for weapon delivery and so on, is higher in the summer than it was in the winter. And I think the key variable here is not so much the length of the war, it's the feeling that Ukraine is, has the upper hand, is victorious. And that can come and go, and that's something you have to look at. But I think that when public opinion has the impression that the initiative, the dynamic is on the Russian side, there might be some kind of fatigue like, why are we doing that? Because eventually they will have to find a compromise, and they will have to surrender to Russian demands. But when there is an impression that actually we're investing in victory, the numbers rise again. So I'm not saying that it is easy and that public opinion is not a factor that can be an obstacle to this maintained support, but I'm not sure it strictly follows the logic of the longer the war, the worse the situation
But you've introduced a new interesting element. Is not only the length of the war, but the outcome of and the ebbs and flows, if we're not talking about outcome of the war, will also influence the willingness to go forward and forward quickly on processes. I think, sir, you wanted to come in as well.
Yeah, I would like to react. Moldova cannot allow itself for a fatigue, because what Ukraine does, from our perspective, is not only self-defense, but it's a forward defense of Moldova. Because Ukraine resists, Russians cannot reach by military means the territory of Moldova. And as long as they cannot reach, we have chance to do European integration. So no fatigue in Moldova on Ukraine. We will continue to support it as long as it needs. Second point, on what Ambassador Maternova mentioned, on the reforms and the importance of reforms. We have an understanding that the process was triggered by a geopolitical earthquake. But at the same time, it's important to do reforms which make us stronger from inside. 2 weeks ago, Madam President chaired the session of the National Commission on European Integration, around 2 hours. Believe me, we discussed in details what has been done, what we have to do, and how fast. So basically, on the top level, there is a focus on delivering on the reforms, and not only because it was a recommendation from EU, but as well to do for our own interest. Third element, our Ukrainian colleagues conducted impressive exercise of self-screening, and we would like to get in contact and to learn from Ukrainian friends how to do it, because we are preparing to do the same. And 2 more points. we look at the EU and this war transforms EU from inside. What type of security actor EU is. There are new defense initiatives there. And we would like to join not only single European market, but we would like to join European security space and to join as many programs, new initiatives which are emerging in this field. We would like to be part of this story. We welcome the invitation from Moldova to join and benefit from EDIRPA program, for instance. We would like to be part of all these security programs and initiatives which are open to candidate states. And the last point, we have unsolved conflict on our territory. So far it was peaceful for 30 years. We don't think that unsolved conflict is an obstacle for full integration of Republic of Moldova to European Union, in line with the statement of High Representative in this sense. We will do our best to extend benefits of European integration to citizens living on the left bank of river. We'll do best to conduct peaceful reintegration, but this process is not an obstacle if it's not fulfilled. It's not an obstacle for us to join fully European Union. These are processes in parallel, but the process of resolving conflict is not determining our place in the European Union. I will stop here.
Yeah, I also agree that we should do what we are doing now. We have two major streams. Our armed forces are doing their best on the battlefield, and we in our civil life have also to make all our efforts to progress towards our EU integration. I think that approach, wait by the river till the corpse of your enemy drifts, is not ours.
Okay, so I'll have one more question, I think, for Claudia and Pierre, and then we'll go to the audience. But Claudia, you want to come on this one as well?
Oh, maybe you ask a question and I link it all together.
Okay, I'll do that. Now we're talking, of course, war means the Russian attack on Ukraine, but accession means Ukrainian accession. At least that's how we've been talking, and we're also hearing from Moldova here. But is this war and is the security environment now creating a package deal? You, in a previous intervention, Pierre, you've talked about the changed perspective in your country towards Ukrainian accession. Does that include the package, or does that include Ukraine? No, I'm asking Pierre for now, and if you want, come in right after that, Claudia, if you.
Happy to touch upon that, but I want to come back on this fatigue issue. I think we kid ourselves if we don't recognize that the longer the war goes, the more difficult it will be to get political support. There might be ups and downs, but the long-term perspective, it's not going to be easy in neither of the European countries, maybe except the Baltic countries and Poland, but the further we go away, the more difficult it will be. And even if you get the political attention, that this attention is translated into clear military, financial, economic support is a different story. So I'm very worried about the long-term perspective, particularly if you look ahead of elections in major countries, not only the US, but a long list of European countries' elections coming up. But then, and that comes back to what we have discussed before, what is then the tasking or the conclusions for EU and NATO? And I think that's even more flexibility, creativity, and courage. Courage is a big word, I know. So let me try to say what I mean with more flexibility or creativity. You mentioned the EU criteria of territorial dispute. We have the same in NATO. The political criteria for NATO 95 is absence of territorial conflicts. If you take that as a total condition, you give Russia a veto over Ukraine's NATO membership. So the question is how flexible and creative NATO countries can be if they are ready, and Ukraine is ready, to touch upon that criterion. There are many options on the table, looking back to the German case, for example, in the 1950s. So I think that's what I mean with more flexibility. Without, and that's the danger, without going on a sidetrack. I see a big difference between the EU accession process and the NATO accession process. If you're on the EU track, you do your criteria, you do your catalog, but you're on the EU track. For NATO, it's different. We have the G7 Plus Declaration of Vilnius, which I think is a wonderful document because it tries to anchor Ukraine in the Western structures. But we should not take these security arrangements, as good as they are, as a substitute to NATO membership. So if you compare NATO and EU, with NATO you always have the temptation to go on a sidetrack. But to be clear, there is a very clear difference between security arrangements as promised in the Vilnius G7 declaration and security guarantees. It's a difference between a partner whom you help and an ally whom you defend. And I think one of the challenges I see ahead is to strengthen and implement the G7 declaration as much as you can without developing it silently into a substitute for NATO membership. So I think have this kind of mixture of flexibility, creativity, but still coverage in a long-term perspective is one of the key challenges I see.
Okay, so we've added another element to the puzzle and to the complexity here, that the security environment is not just the relationship between EU accession and NATO accession, but also the relationship to the structure created in Vilnius through the G7 declaration. Now, can you tie these together? Back to my initial question, Pierre, as to, are we talking Ukraine or are you talking package deal? And how does the war affect that? Is it a convoy? Is it a package? Is it Inkene? How is that in your country?
Yeah, thank you. There is a clear connection. And for instance, when the European Political Community Summit was held in Moldova, there was also this strong sense that there was also a challenge, there was also a geopolitical battle fought in this country. We have also witnessed demonstrations in Georgia in which civil society was mobilized against laws perhaps influenced or suggested by pro-Russian elements. So, yeah, there is a coherence in this whole package, and I think that the argument according to which there can be no gray zone today, there is no longer any prospect for a buffer zone between the European Union and Russia, and that everything that you left out will be a prey, will be vulnerable. This is, I think, a strong argument that can be useful not just for Ukraine but for the whole package. And no, I'll stop here. Yeah.
Good moment to stop and bring in the audience. You've already had some time to think about questions. I have a first hand. I think there is a microphone here somewhere, if I'm not mistaken. It'll be with us in a second. It's being collected as we speak. Right here, lady in the first row here. One sentence of introduction, please.
Irina Solonenko from the Center for Liberal Modernity in Berlin. We are honored to be a partner of this forum. Very brief comment before I ask question to Katarina Maternova. Congratulations on your appointment as well. So you were asking about whether security will accelerate accession, and then Katarina made link between reforms and accession. And what I see in Ukraine, that security challenges have increased demand in the society in Ukraine for reforms, and this in turn increased pressure on the president, on the decision makers in Ukraine to accelerate reforms. So there are many linkages here between security environment, reforms which have been accelerated, and accession. And the question to you, you mentioned, Katarina Martinova, you mentioned that you see the accession negotiations going hand in hand or parallel to real integration taking place. and this is we are not waiting until full accession, right? As far as I understand, there are now a lot of ideas, staged accession and others, ideas that Ukraine can be gradually integrated into the EU. For instance, in certain sectors, in parallel to accession negotiations. As far as I got, you also meant this. And so my question would be, if you see this as a possibility for Ukraine to become a part of single market in certain sectors, in parallel to accession negotiations taking place, which means also joining EU institutions, configurations of council in these sectors without maybe a speaking role, but to understand the agenda, for instance. Yeah, this is my question.
Yes, we only have one so far, so please indicate to me that you have questions. There is more, so I'll take Alina in the side. So, sir, here, lady here in the second row. Alina, introduce yourself, please.
Alina Inaik with the German Marshall Fund. I want to introduce another element to the puzzle that Tomas is you are trying to build, which is the need for reform, the potential of need for reform, but not for Ukraine and Moldova, but for the European Union. There are some, and I'm one of them, who believe that in order for the European Union to integrate Ukraine especially, it needs to reform. It needs to reform in many domains. First of all, agriculture to start with, but not only. So this is another element that will slow down or at least complicate the process. And I'd be interested in seeing how this is to be addressed. And second element, which is not only the need for reform, and it's not only fatigue of Europe, but also some countries in Europe, an increasing number of countries in Europe, see their own domestic interests, national interests, threatened by the integration of Ukraine. Of course, I'm talking about the 5 countries that see the grain deal as, and everything related to it as a threat through their economic interests. That, again, I think complicates the picture, and it's interesting to be taken into consideration. And last but not least, Claudia, you mentioned that no country that has a military conflict on its territory can can enter NATO, which is true, but also the Franco-German document that was just released 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago suggests the same criteria for accession to the EU. So that's another element that I think further complicates the puzzle that Tomas, you're trying to build.
Okay, so the first question, we'll take these two because it's really already a complex picture that the questions are asking to solve, to get at. The first was at Katarina Matenova, and I think the second is probably for everyone, including Katarina. So why don't you start, and then we'll draw.
Thank you very much. Both very valid points that the reforms need to be both on the side of the EU and on the side of the countries that are trying to enter. I'll get to that in a second. There is already, and that's why I mentioned these, association agreements and these long name DCFTAs, whatever. There is already, in the case of Ukraine, the possibility of entering single market already in the current structure, which is a possibility that's not the case for any of the other associate members, because since the Ukrainian one was the last adopted, it's actually more far-reaching, and we are in fact looking at Ukraine becoming part of the roaming agreement, as well as in some of the other digital areas, a member of the single market earlier. So this is just, this is obviously a very small step compared to anything that could be called gradual enlargement or gradual integration, but there is active thinking about how to do this, because I think everybody recognizes that the full membership is going to take time, and one needs to build. There is no answer yet, but this is very much an active thinking, and an area where I believe that a lot of the think tanks and also people inside the system will thoughts on. Now, very much agree, Alyona, that the EU needs to reform, but I would not think that agriculture, for example, is the most challenging. No, the most challenging is the decision-making process in an enlarged EU. And I would go even further. The threat, sure, there is a threat from Ukraine grain, etc. And this is not the first time. I mean, there are going to be issues like this, of course, popping up. But I think, and I'm looking at Pierre whether he would agree, the threat of Ukraine coming in is in the inevitable eastward shift in the power balance that would result. The 2004 enlargement didn't imbalance the power where it was. Believe me, I've been in the system. It's firmly where it was before the 2004 enlargement. I don't think that would be really the same consequence if Ukraine were to enter the EU. And these are real, these are real issues. These are real constraints. For example, decision-making, even the deliberative process that we have inside the EU at 27 is already complicated. It's already very, very cumbersome, very complicated. We manage because we get things done. But if you were to increase it by 10 or 5, it probably would, break it would be the straw that would break the camel's back. So I think, I don't think the sectoral issues or even the financial issues are really the heart of the anxiety. So that's why the reform of the institutional reform and policy reform of the EU needs to go hand in hand, because these are real. I mean, these are real constraints in a complex institutional setup as the European Union has.
That sounds like a pretty comprehensive answer. Anybody else, anything to add to that? I'm looking around me. If you, well, perhaps, here's your moment. Yeah.
Okay. Just a couple of historical references that I think can be interesting in the context of those debates. First, about the institutional reforms. When Poland celebrated, and also other countries celebrated the National Day in the 3rd of May, which celebrates the 1791 Constitution, which was in a way a patriotic and anti-Russian constitution. I wrote an article about this experience and the links that existed between this experience and the EU institutional reform discussion, because what was interesting in this constitution was that it abolished the veto right in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth Parliament, because it was believed that the veto right was actually something that paralyzed the two nations republic, in particular in the face of external geopolitical threats. And I have looked at the wording of this constitution. It is very strong. It says we abolish the veto right forever because it is destructive of society. And this is the declaration that the Polish people celebrate every 3rd of May as the first constitution, and also it is actually the first region constitution in Europe. So I think it is a nice historical experience, because this is also the kind of problem we have today. We know that with a veto right, it is the right to vote for external powers, and we know that it happens sometimes. The other historical experience I wanted to mention is related to the debate on territorial disputes. And this is just a parallel. In the 1950s, when there was a debate about West Germany NATO membership, there were many people in France who argued that the moment West Germany is in NATO, we will be in World War III, because the first decision of West Germany would be to try to invade Eastern Germany, to try to reconquer its lost territories in the East. So we should never be in an alliance with the Germans, because they will entrap us in a war. That's just the comparison.
Yes, you may. I just want to be short because I want to do one more round, if I may, Claudia.
Very quickly to Alyona. I think I just wanted to underline that this Franco-German paper is no government paper. It's a paper from an expert group, and it has not been endorsed as a Franco-German official paper. I think it's really important to underline. So that's not the official German position. I would be delighted to see many other experts group coming up with such a paper, so there are others on the table, you know. But actually it brings me back to the point, and that nicely links to what Pierre said about creativity. And the German example actually goes further than what Pierre just said, because Western Germany had at that time the state objective of unification. And when they entered NATO, in a big network of treaties, Parisian treaties and others, Germany had to sign that they will not follow that objective of unification with military means. And if they were to do so, Article 5 would not apply. Combined with a rather complicated network of the German basic law, the constitution, and others, it enabled Germany to join NATO in 1955, but particularly after unification, the eastern parts, so Eastern Germany, actually to join the treaties Western Germany was already part of, and to become a member of NATO. So if you want to think about creative solutions, there are many examples on the table that are actually really inspiring. You can never actually take one-to-one, because the geopolitical situation is so totally different. But if it's about possibilities to actually, how would I call it, frame this criteria of territorial disputes, if you want to have a solution, they are. And I think that's the main message I want to bring around. But it's not NATO only, but it's a kind of bigger network of treaties and agreements you need to envisage. But together with many other things in Germany, it actually worked. So there's something we could take inspiration from.
Okay, I want to take one last, probably larger round of questions. Please don't ask 3 or 4 questions. Maybe ask 1 question, because we have several. There was the gentleman in the back, there was the lady in the first row, and there was the gentleman in the second row. And if there's nobody else, first, second, third, that's your group.
Sergei Sidorenko, European Pravda. I'd like to focus on what Stanislav said about possibility to become a full-fledged EU member without solving territorial conflicts. I would not shy to say that in Ukraine, this public position of Moldovan authorities are well perceived as quite dubious. We are, or at least many of us think that it's rather a trick. But maybe we are wrong, and I would like other participants of the panel to share their view. Claudia is rather, as far as I understand, supporting that. Maybe others have other views. So is that possible in current reality, that the EU would be allowed by member states to take a final step in integration of the country, both Moldova and Ukraine, without solving territorial conflict with Russia? Thank you.
Okay, that's a clear question. Territorial conflicts hindering the final step, question mark. That raises the Cyprus specter.
Nona Michailidis, Senior Fellow at the Institute for International Affairs in Rome. My question is about the European political community initiative launched by France. I saw, by the way, the Moldova hosted one of the summits of the EPC. I want just to understand what is the reasoning behind the objective of the forum, behind the Macron's initiative, because there are some fears that it adds more to the strategic ambiguity to the EU existence of this forum, and that it serves to create an initiative which will turn kind of an alternative to the real accession process. So I was wondering what was your take on this?
Okay. The European community, political community as an alternative, question mark. And the third question.
So simply a short clarification, namely the Constitution of 1791 cancelled the veto right since people living between Dnieper, Vistula and in Vilnius felt themselves one political community, one political nation. And therefore they really think that veto right is obsolete. But the problem is that the European Union is not one political nation. It consists of many European nations, and of course I believe that it will consist of also of Ukrainian nations. So it is rather not the situation which you should compare with 18th century, but with 16th century where actually this veto right was introduced to protect interests of every country within the Commonwealth. And why it is the constitution was anti-Russian? It is like you could claim that Maidan revolution was 2013, 2014 was anti-Russian. No, it was for independence. Thank you.
Okay. You'll get a chance to get no answer. Then we'll have two questions: European political community and territorial conflicts hindering a final step of EU accession? Question mark. One to my right side here.
I think Claudia expressed clearly that by accepting the fact that these countries cannot join EU until they solve a conflict is just giving the veto right to Russia to decide what happens to these countries on their path towards the European Union. Secondly, we think that the closer Moldova gets to EU, the better are perspectives to deal with this conflict peacefully. Third,
can you explain that? Why that is?
Yes, because it introduces a powerful economic dynamic. Transnistrian region, separatist region, is already exporting 70% of its goods to European market, and it relies to around 40%, if not more, to imports from European market. Yeah? The closer Moldova propagates to EU, the more powerful economic dynamic, which makes Transnistrian region closer connected to European Union. I think that this will be a beneficial dynamic as well for Ukraine. The fact that Moldova will join EU and will generate the powerful effect to bring gradually Transnistria in the political, economic and legal field of Republic of Moldova. On EPC, I will not explain the reasons because I think those who initiated the process have to, but we were happy to host the summit, the first big event on such scale organized by Republic of Moldova. It helped us to build some important links with EU member states who helped us to provide security of this event. We gained important experience in this field. Third, what we see that on the level of EPC, there are initiatives for all participants of this format to deal jointly with some security issues of common interest. For instance, energy security. There is a thinking how to join efforts to do something on cybersecurity. And obviously, for us, these are issues of interest, and we would like to participate in any initiatives which will be approved on the level of EPC.
Thank you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Sviatoslav that nevertheless, we understand that we are now facing unprecedented and very challenging conditions, but let's say any excuses in terms of this will be only in favor of Russia. I agree with this absolutely. As for European political community, we do not perceive this as an alternative for our Euro integration aspirations, but only as another platform which will help all candidate states to discuss the most important issues of security and defense on the whole European continent. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to go around because these will be the last words from our panel, so I want to give everybody a chance. Claudia and then Pierre, and as is appropriate, Ambassador Mataranova has the last word.
Okay.
Maybe just a quick on this territorial conflict. I think there's one difference between territorial conflict and open war. And you can, I think, if I'm only talking about NATO, it is, I think, with creativity and flexibility possible to deal with that criteria, but not in the high-intensity war. So I think I would make that difference. But again, only talking about NATO and not about the EU. I think maybe just as a last word to echo what the ambassador said earlier about or just to underline what she said about the policy and institutional reforms that are necessary for the EU to actually be able to welcome new members. This has, I tend to think, a public dimension in that in most European countries we have an enormous rise in EU skepticism. And if the EU is not able to show that it is able to reform together and kind of reform for the greater good, the skepticism towards EU cooperation and integration will even grow. So I think we have, beyond the political and institutional reform, an enormous responsibility in terms of public perception that makes the reform question so urgent, looking inside the European Union.
Pierre, last words, European political community, territorial disputes.
Yeah, on territorial dispute, I want to add anything. The political community, no, it's not an alternative, and actually it's another track, and I think that the British interest for this format is also evidence that it's something else. It's not about it's not about creating an alternative for those candidate countries. It's in order to be able to have a broader European discussion about all those general geopolitical questions that are broader than just the EU or NATO framework and can concern all countries of the continent. And I think this is the purpose of this initiative. And finally, I don't want to get into an argument about the Polish history and the history of the Republic of the Two Nations, which is fascinating. But let me just say that, for instance, in the case of the Republic of the Two Nations, the purpose of veto rights was to limit the ability of the central power of the king to coerce members of the aristocracy or citizens. But the moment you consider that the main threat is the outside, for instance, the Russian threat and so on, you have to think differently. And this is exactly the same in the European Union. If you consider that we are doing a geopolitical enlargement, that we want to become a geopolitical union, we have to think primarily in terms of those external threats, and we have to behave like a geopolitical actor. That's it for me. Thank you.
Strong point. Thank you.
I would very much echo that point, and it is hotly debated, and it's going to be one of the toughest debates. But just to explain for those who may not know, that foreign policy issues in the European Union are decided by unanimity. So every round of sanctions has to be unanimously agreed. In the case of enlargement, there are about 100 steps in the process that all have to have unanimity. And so this is what Pierre was referring to as indeed, if we are going to be a big geopolitical actor, this is something that will needless to say, be on the agenda to discuss. Just two very quick points on the territorial disputes. I must admit that I think it's the second point that Stanislav mentioned that that the EU would be looking at. In other words, an incentive for Transnistria to peacefully integrate, because I think as you mentioned, Thomas, the specter of Cyprus probably would not be a very enticing prospect for getting countries in. So, but I do see the dynamics you are talking about. It already started with the electricity situation, and soon will be gas, and there will be an incentive for Transnistria, hopefully. And what was the second issue?
The first one is territorial issues. You did that in the European political community.
Okay, and there I think Pierre said it all. It's actually important for the European continent to talk in the current geopolitical environment, and I don't think that any of the countries that want to join the EU see it as an alternative, and it's not going to have that dynamic, but I think it's a useful forum indeed for some of the specific issues.
So with these last words, I want to close our panel by thanking the panelists and all of you, because combined, I think we opened up the conversation to include and go beyond the initial question of speed or delay, but to encompass some of the key elements, the different institutional arrangement from European political community on the far end of the spectrum, to the G7, to NATO, finally to EU accession, all play a part in this. In the question of how does the security environment influence this process, and we've also covered a whole set of issues related to these institutional arrangements. So a complicated topic that I hope we broke down in a sensible way, and I want to thank you for being with us on that attempt. Thank you.
Thank you.